good to have you with us in the 9 p.m. edition of the Urban Debate. On February 1st, the Military of Myanmar effected a coup on the government hours before the newly elected legislature was to meet. 24 ministers were removed. There were 11 replacements brought in. Aung San Suu Kyi, of course, along with the top party members, was arrested right away. Since then, Myanmar has seen massive protests across the country. People in hundreds and thousands come out frequently to protest against this military coup. It's led to ugly violence. It's led to deaths of over 300 people. Thousands have been detained, and the situation is not pretty. Now, while that, of course, has been a story that we've been tracking constantly, tonight I want to talk about what it means for us, for India as one of the bigger powers in this region, for India as a neighbor of Myanmar, having deep ties with this country, for India and its own refugee policy. What does it mean for us in terms of humanitarian help? What does it mean for us in terms of any refugees who may be coming into our country? How are we going to deal with that? What is very clear is that as the Myanmar military holds firm and says that they're at least going to be in power for 1 year, we don't know when the democratic setup will return. We don't even know how long these protests and this violence and spate of violence and the alleged atrocities are going to continue in our neighboring country. But it's happening right in our backyard. And so we need to know where we stand as a nation in terms of a policy. What role are we going to play? There have been several hundreds refugees, we are told, at least a few of them who've entered India. And along the border, there are local NGOs who are providing them with help, with shelter, with relief, with food, even medical supplies. About 1,042 Myanmar nationals reportedly have entered on our side and are being helped. Some of them, actually, about 100 of them were reportedly even sent back. But they are, again, from other routes into other villages entered. Reports suggest that many of them are police personnel and fire brigade personnel on the run currently for their lives. Now, there's been quite a bit of controversy as well. For example, the Mizoram government wrote to the centre saying we must take a stand and help our Mizo brethren and lend a helping hand to those who seek shelter with us. Meanwhile, the Manipur government also quoted a controversy recently when on March 26, a letter was issued asking the local authorities to not open camps for food and shelter, to turn away refugees even if they are turned away politely, that only medical attention will be given for grievous injuries, but there should be absolutely no effort to otherwise provide shelter, that even we should stop our Aadhaar enrollment in this area with immediate effect. This circular triggered quite a bit of controversy. Many questions were raised. And within a couple of days, there was a U-turn by the state. On March 29, the state said, disregard the earlier letter, which was misconstrued, I don't know how, and that we will provide all aid to the refugees and take humanitarian steps. But I want to have a larger conversation about what are we doing there on ground and what is our policy, what should be our policy as this crisis, a humanitarian crisis, explodes yet again in our neighborhood. So we say good evening to Rajiv Bhatia, former diplomat and distinguished fellow of the Gateway House, Leela Ponappa, also former diplomat, former deputy national security advisor. I also have Tuhin Sinha, author and leader of the BJP, joining us right now, and Mr. Vanlalvena, member of the parliament of the Rajya Sabha with the MNF, the Mizo National Front, joining us right now as well. If I could start with you, Mr. Vanlalvena, can you give us a sense of what the states like Manipur and Mizoram are currently doing? How are we treating this crisis?
Yeah, hello. Yeah. Good evening, Miss. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, nowadays it is reported that from Mizoram, from NGO leaders, more than 1,000 refugees have been entered Mizoram till today. Yeah, the condition of refugee in our state is good because the government of Mizoram and NGO are jointly welcoming them and prepare a refugee camp at Aizawl, which is newly opened today evening. So today only about 80 to 90 Myanmar refugees have settled there. Tonight is the first night in the refugee camp at Aizawl for Myanmar. And moreover, some more refugees are staying at different villages near Myanmar border. So that is the present condition of the Myanmar refugee in Mizoram. The government of Mizoram, all the people of Mizoram are take care of them because they belong to our tribe. So we love and care them.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So you're saying a new camp has been set up where 290 refugees tonight will spend their first night and the government will take care of them, provide them food and shelter. Is there any, any insight you can give us on how many more people, refugees, are you preparing for, are you anticipating will come?
Yeah, only in this refugee camp. Yeah, about 500 refugees will be accommodated because it's a big building. It is RAY building. So about 500 refugees will be accommodated. So this camp is prepared only for the refugee coming into Aizawl city. But there are more refugees in another village in rural areas near Myanmar border. So for those refugees from Myanmar, the camp is not yet prepared because most of them are distributed into different houses because they have their own relatives. There is no refugee camp in the rural areas. This camp that is newly opened today is just for the refugee who came to Aizawl city.
Mr. Vanlalvena, I want to also ask you, is the state government and you and the center all on the same page? Because, on March 10th, Center has written a letter to all northeastern states to say ensure that people don't come in, that there is no influx of illegal immigrants coming in from Myanmar. So what happens to that letter then?
Yeah, this is not illegal immigrants. They are refugees. They are not illegal immigrants. Let them, in the state policy of Mizoram is that let them stay in India, especially in the state of Northeast, or especially in the state of Mizoram. Let them live peacefully for the time being. And we shall send them back to Myanmar after the restoration of peace and normalcy in Myanmar. So we cannot treat them as illegal immigrants. They are not illegal immigrants. They are coming just because they seek the shelter for their life. It is the outcome of military coup in Myanmar. They are not treated as illegal immigrants.
Okay, a very valid point that you have made, and I will request you to stay on with us as I take this point across to our other panelists as well. In Leela Ponappa, let's start with you. The differentiation to be made here for a policy that you may have for illegal immigrants versus when you're looking at a humanitarian crisis in a neighboring country and a possible situation of hundreds of refugees seeking shelter, how do we then decide our policy?
I
Not
think,
just
I
100.
think in other states also, there is no illegal immigrants from Myanmar.
Yes,
Most
Mr.
of the,
Vanlalvena, if you will just give me time to take this to our other panelists, I will come back to you. You've raised a very valid point. Yes, Leela Ponappa, please.
I think there needs to be a clear differentiation between India's political interests and our humanitarian values. This is not the first time that India has had to receive refugees from Myanmar. I certainly hope it would be the last, but one can never tell how the situation might develop. But India has had a very long experience with refugees, not just from Myanmar, from Tibet, from Iran, from Sri Lanka, and of course, most recently, as we saw during the Prime Minister's visit to Bangladesh, the massive refugee situation that India had to deal with and provide shelter to refugees from what was then East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, until such time as, according to the government of India's policy, they could return in safety and honor. Now, I think you mentioned the fact of Myanmar being a neighbor. It is, in fact, one of India's major neighbors. And I really don't see that we have much of a choice. I mean, there may be official instructions that are issued, but how do you turn away a desperate person? As the former speaker, Mr. Vanlalvena, just mentioned, these are people who fear for their lives. And this is precisely what I meant when I referred to the fact that India has had refugees from different parts of Asia primarily. In fact, India has received them on the basis of a policy of what's called non-refoulement, namely, you do not send them back until you can be assured that they would be able to return in safety. This does not mean that India needs to go all out in terms of making projections and statements the way that countries that are a long way off choose to make. That has never been our way, because we have strong relations with Myanmar. These must continue. The dialogue must continue. Typically, it would be done quietly. But the humanitarian values that India is known for, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is often spoken of, is something that also gets invoked. So India has to accept them. In the earlier times, when in the 1980s and 90s, when again the army had been in power, there were refugees not just in Manipur and in Mizoram, but also in Delhi. And I think this is a reality that we have to recognize. India has always received refugees, not because it seeks to go in for political change or regime change in other countries, but because these are our values.
Because these are our values, and in humanitarian times, you need to provide that kind of a help to Hind Sena. Then what explains a letter that was issued, 20 days ago that told the states to just get tougher on the borders instead?
To the best of my knowledge, that letter has been withdrawn at this point of time. But if you look at the larger issue, number one, India is committed to ensuring a steadfast transition to democratic process back in Myanmar. This is something which we have stated on 1st February itself. In fact, if you may just allow me to go back into history. See, about 3 decades ago, we had a very black and white policy insofar as Myanmar was concerned. We would not engage with the military establishment at all. But starting with P.V. Narasimha Rao, or a rather unusually erudite Congress Prime Minister, we've had a very calibrated approach insofar as Myanmar was concerned. Why? Because this was on account of 2 reasons. One, to negate the impact of China on Myanmar, because from a geostrategic importance, China would have a direct access to the Indian Ocean via Myanmar. And 2, if you look at the other factor, Myanmar military establishment has been a huge help to India in circumventing and thwarting some of the militants in the northeast. And that is one of the reasons why we have taken a very studied approach towards the new regime in Myanmar. Now, coming to the refugee crisis, unlike 3 decades ago, India is not in a situation where India can accommodate all. So yes, while we will be extremely sympathetic in exceptional situations, to the best of my understanding, I think the 4 states bordering Myanmar would be taking an independent decision based upon the situation in each of the states, because there is a 1,600-kilometer porous border, and of course, the Mizo people have a larger connect with the ethnic tribe so that explains why 1,000 people are already in Mizoram. But having said that, I think the larger focus of India is to prevail upon the Myanmar administration to adopt a more humane approach, which happens through a lot of discrete channels, which are not disclosed all the time. In fact, the Quad also prevailed upon, this approach that the focus should be on getting the previous premier of the Democratic premier of on Sang Suu Kyi released at the earliest, and ensuring that the democratic process prevails, which whatever time it takes, our focus would be in ensuring that the present military establishment adopts a more humane approach towards protesters and the killings do not happen.
Well, while those can be the issues that are raised and agreed upon, I'm just trying to understand then, Mr. Rajiv Bhatia, that what explains and how do you balance this policy where you're giving refuge and on the other hand, you're sending representatives to attend their military parade, as India did just a few days ago?
Thank you. I think I'd like to make 2 or 3 direct points in answer to your question, Tanvi. I think the problem at our border today needs to be framed in the larger context. Myanmar has 5 land neighbors, and all of them are facing the same situation. The biggest problem is faced by Thailand. They are fearing a major exodus of people from Myanmar into Thailand, which is the most favorite destination. This is also the same situation on the China border. China has completely closed down the gates and they are not permitting anybody to go in there. This is not happening on Bangladesh, but Bangladesh, as you know, has got its own complete quota. A few years back, 1.1 million Rohingyas are sitting in Bangladesh. So in that context, these people coming across to Mizoram and Manipur side is not at all something that is unexpected. I think the government was expecting and was prepared for it. The issue here is whether you want to be a very generous, open-ended kind of policy or you want to be a restrictive in your approach on this. Whatever option that we follow, we naturally have to be showing utmost humanitarian instinct and politeness and courtesy and doing soft handling, because that is what India is known for. But generally speaking, as far as I can see, authorities want to follow a restrictive policy. The assumption here is that India is a very large country with a large population. It has many, many challenges, and we cannot have a situation where first we allow a few people, then a few hundred people, then a few thousand people, and then the whole thing develops into a very, very big affair. This is what I think the people in Delhi probably would like to avoid. But my last point really is that we need to see this influx in the wider context. What exactly can be done in order to promote the resolution of the problem in Myanmar? It is a very serious problem where a kind of a undeclared war is going on between the authorities and the people. And in that context, we all know that eventually this will have to be brought to an end through dialogue, through compromise, through some kind of a solution acceptable to both the military and to the people's representatives. So I feel reading between the lines that India very much favors reconciliation and dialogue. India has been in touch with various parties. India is a very proactive member of the Security Council. And if there is one initiative that seems to be in play, this is the Indonesia-backed ASEAN initiative, which is trying to seek reconciliation in Myanmar, then the real solution to the influx on the border is to start putting our heads together and supporting the promotion of reconciliation in Myanmar.
Correct, and you're absolutely right that we will have to be one of those who takes the lead in restoring, peace and normalcy and finding a resolution in Myanmar. But again, I ask you this question, and more from the diplomatic terms: how does this work, then, Mr. Rajiv Bhatia, that we send our representative to attend the military parade that was held just a couple of days ago? Now, in such times, do you continue the diplomatic relations with the military which is in charge there?
I don't speak for the government of India anymore. Leela and I used to do that, but that was a long time back. But having served in the government and now having been out of the government for a decade, we can understand fully how these things are done. When our military attaché located in Myanmar goes to attend the Armed Forces Day celebration, this is a very normal, routine affair. It does not in any fashion involve the approval of anything that the military government may or may not be doing. The second point to remember is that the Indian authorities have to maintain the lines of communication with the government of Myanmar. This is what almost every neighbor of Myanmar has done. We are not different from any of them. We should not be compared, I think, with regard to, these distant friends of Myanmar, the US, UK, European Union. We are a neighbor, and we find that our neighbor's house is on fire. We are directly concerned, and therefore we have to talk to everybody in Myanmar, the people, the government, and everybody.
Okay, so maintaining that, fine line, the balancing act, part of the diplomacy, of course, which is why we have both of you experts on this panel to help us understand. But if I can just go back to Mr. Vanlalvena, and Leela Ponappa, I'll come to you after that. But Mr. Vanlalvena, we have to also see long term. We don't know for how long this situation will continue, how many people may seek refuge with us, for how much are we prepared, and for how long are we prepared to give them that help?
Yeah, I don't think so, because the solution of Myanmar may be solved. Yeah, I think after half year or 1 year, this military ruling may not be last so long time, because the present situation, as we see, this happening is different comparing to the previous incident, like in the year 1988. Yeah, in the year 1988, the issue was taken up by only by the student. It is only the student movement demanding democracy at that time. But this year, the thing is different. This is not only the student movement. It is the movement of all the people of Myanmar, including all different states and in the plain area. This incident cover throughout the country of Myanmar, and it affects all the people of Myanmar. They are all fighting together, and they are jointly fighting the same issue. Moreover, all the insurgent group in different states of Myanmar are also fighting together to oppose this Myanmar military ruling. So this thing never happened in Myanmar. That's why this Myanmar government will not stand, may not be able to stand too much time. I think this military government may fall during this year, and after that, let them go back. All the refugees, maybe in Mizoram, maybe in Manipur, or maybe in Nagaland. Yes, that's why I don't think these refugees may not need to live permanently in India. This is my opinion.
also help us understand, because some of the reports tell us that many of these refugees are actually police personnel or those from the fire brigade. Would that be correct?
Sure. What's your question? Please repeat.
Who are these refugees? We are told that many of them are actually Myanmar police personnel or fire brigade personnel who are seeking shelter right now.
I don't know your question. Please repeat.
So, Mr. Vanlalvena, I was just saying, people who are coming from Myanmar right now, do we know why are they seeking shelter? Who are them? Are they police personnel of Myanmar? Are they from their fire department, or are they civilians?
Yeah, I kind of got you. The net service may not be good. I don't understand your speaking.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Let me move on to the other aspect. And Leela Ponappa, you wanted to make a point, I think, on the larger policy and the balancing act that has to be done. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I'd like to get back to the initial point I made about the need for a very finely tuned, calibrated policy, a two-track policy, if you will, which Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, like me, is very familiar with, of being able to separate India's political and security and geopolitical interests from the humanitarian situation. Now, when I said that there really isn't much of a choice, it's because when people move, they will overcome any type of barrier. We see this with regard to movement into Europe, with regard to movement into the United States. And India too has experienced this, where on the one hand, obviously we would not want the pressure, the economic difficulties of having to cope with a huge influx. And yet, history has shown us that this happens. And the best example, in fact, particularly for many people of the younger generation who might not quite be aware of what happened in 1971 when the crackdown in Dhaka took place on March 25th, with the anniversary of which was just observed, nobody quite expected that inflow of refugees. So your question, your surmise about how long this is going to last, even General Ziaul Haq, when he came into power in Pakistan, said, well, I'm going to hand over power in 3 months. But as a senior colleague of mine said, the last time a general handed over power to a civilian government was probably during the times of the Roman Empire. I think there's one honorable exception in Bangladesh where a military government did facilitate elections and transfer. So we don't know how long this will last. The last time it happened in Myanmar, it lasted well over a decade. Aung San Suu Kyi was under house arrest. There was a very, very slow process of dialogue and so on until you got a kind of partial restoration of democratic processes, even if not of genuine democracies. Meanwhile, India maintains state-to-state relations, as it must. One, because we have a long border. Two, because we have security interests. And because we may not like the nature of another regime. And I think you just have to look around India's neighborhood to see how many democracies there are. But yet we have to deal with them because geography has put us together. Therefore, the presence of our military attaché at the parade, as Ambassador Bhatia mentioned, was part of normal state-to-state relations. Nevertheless, this is another aspect of the relationship. And this is what happens when you have this kind of unrest or upheaval in a neighboring country, where you have to try to balance many of these different facets of the relationship as best you can in terms, above all, of India's national interest. And I think this is the fine line that the government of India will need to proceed on because the black and white policy that Mr. Sinha mentioned at one point of time, in fact, did not work to India's interests. It opened the doors within Myanmar for the influences that we did not wish to see there. It really left the field open for China. And yet this was influenced by countries that are thousands of miles away and have no direct interest in the situation on the ground. That was followed by the two-track policy, where, yes, India dealt with the then military regime, much bilateral cooperation with regard to benefits for the local population in terms of development were put in place. There were many programs, many of which continue until today: scholarships, capacity building, scientific development, and so on. But at the same time, there was quiet dialogue about how domestic resolution within Myanmar would, in fact, help not just India, but the international community to help Myanmar further. Now, we certainly hope for restoration of peace and resolution of the political tensions and conflicts that are currently taking place in Myanmar. Not for the first time, we should remember. But let's be realistic about it and recognize that this is a situation that will have to play itself out. Because ultimately, the solutions will have to come from Myanmar's own people.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. We have to be realistic about it, which is why, when sometimes when you say see states respond in what could look like an ad hoc basis, then those questions have to be asked. Now, of course, we must help people on humanitarian grounds. We must provide them with food and shelter. In fact, if anything, that Manipur order that came out a few days ago really was very concerning, and I'm glad that the Manipur government went back on it and issued a clarification to say, well, no, we will be providing all kinds of help which is required. But Mr. Rajiv Bhatia, to ensure that there is a resolution or to push for it, what role can India play? Lest we have thousands of these refugees on our soil for years and decades together.
Yeah, that's a very thoughtful question. I think we have to recognize that it's a very complex problem. It is no longer about who should be the leader or which party should be in the government. Now things have really become very serious in Myanmar, because it's now a clash of two visions. The present military leadership, to be frank, believes that the most that can be given to Myanmar is limited democracy, in which army has the upper hand. On the other hand, the people have made it clear that they are through with partial democracy. Their vision is of full democracy, in which the army actually goes back to the barracks. So with this kind of lines drawn and people getting killed every day, the solution is not going to be easy. But this is a Buddhist country, and it is possible that at some stage or the other, hopefully sooner rather than later, they can derive inspiration from Lord Buddha's teachings that the change and solution and progress have to come from within. And this is where friendly, well-meaning, cooperative countries like India come into the picture. Our diplomats in the Security Council are working very hard. Our diplomats in ASEAN capitals are working very hard. We know for sure that the Indian hierarchy is fully, positively preoccupied with the situation, which is being monitored on a daily basis. So I think the negotiators from the region, the diplomats from the region, from ASEAN, they should have the first real go. And I think they would be enthused to do something, provided the principal parties in Myanmar also begin to see that the fundamental responsibility for solution rests on their shoulders. Now, I know I say this with a heavy heart. I spent 3 years in Myanmar. I'm familiar with places where people are getting killed. I knew some of the people themselves, although I left Myanmar a long time back. But it is a situation where every Indian's heart bleeds for Myanmar. And we very much hope and wish that both through internal changes and adjustments and external help, a solution will be found. Because, let me finally make the point, that if this kind of undeclared war goes on between the authorities and the people, it is going to be really, really bad for the country and the region. So the region has to be invested in helping Myanmar to come back to the track of normalcy and democratic transition.
Well, absolutely, you're absolutely correct. And, I'm glad that both you and Leela Ponappa are here to shed these insights here for our viewers. Now, very quickly, before I wrap this up, to Tuhin. Tuhin, the Mizoram Chief Minister actually wrote to the Prime Minister and the central government saying it is our responsibility as human beings to provide food, shelter on humanitarian grounds to the people of Myanmar who've taken refuge in our state. He also went on to then say that I request you that this is a human catastrophe of gigantic proportions and therefore we must look at providing refuge and asylum to these refugees. So where is our central government policy now? What is our policy going forward?
In the past, we have always been extremely sympathetic, but as you see, we've seen a 30-year or many decades of insurgency in Northeast, which is now finally peace has been restored over there. So we are being extra cautious. Like I said, in exceptional situations, we would still be open. But coming to the larger geopolitical challenge that it poses to India, see, let us be very, let us accept the situation that we can't be wishful of every country in the world being an equal democracy. In Myanmar, from 2011 onwards, any which way, Myanmar was under a supervised democracy where 25% of the seats in the lawmaking assembly were to be given to the military establishment. And there were all sorts of restrictions under which the former President Aung San Suu Kyi was operating. But at this point of time, I think the larger focus of India, even if it is discreet, would be in prevailing upon the military establishment over there to ensure that whatever limited democracy can be restored, whatever humane approach, and that won't just be the stand of India. If you look at the Japanese Deputy Defense Minister's reaction on the same day, February 1, when India reacted, he was equally circumspect and saying that if we overreact, we would only make Myanmar play into the hands of China. So given the malafide intentions of China, all the countries, most of the top countries, and that is the reason why 7 other countries participated in the military exercise together. Because honestly, it has to be a calibrated approach. And insofar as the refugee crisis is concerned, I can again assure you that in exceptional situations, but yes, we have also seen in the past that in such situations, you never know what the scale of migration would be, which would pose some problems for India if the scale is of a magnitude which causes some friction internally.
Why not? We just came out with an entirely new law to give citizenships to people, refugees from 3 nations of specific communities. So we should be able to, at least for now, with open arms, you take care of these refugees who are coming in, where their nation is in a complete flux, violence, fighting for their freedom, fighting for democracy in their country. There is no simple answer for this. I will agree with all of our panelists that there isn't going to be a clear, black and white, simple answer on how to define this policy. But India, in the northeastern states and the central government, will need to now seriously sit down and define a policy as to how we're going to take it forward. It's not something that's going to go away overnight. It's not even something that's going away in the next few months. And as more and more people from Myanmar turn towards us for help, which our values would say we provide it to them, how are we going to go about it is what we need to look at. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation.